Hartford City.
I'm sure I will. And I'm a big grab on
It's the shit show.
It's
It's the shit show. It's the shit show.
So, I'm glad you came. This was perfect timing because if you'd have came in the last time, I wouldn't have had that book to share.
Yes.
And I have, man, as soon as we went to this bookstore, well, it was my 5K, so I went up and ran that 5K like a dummy, and my daughter and my wife went with me, and they ran it like dummies. I don't know why we're running. There wasn't one bear. There wasn't one bear in sight. I wasn't being chased by wolves. Nothing.
What is it? Why do you hate bears so much? I've heard you say that before.
I love bears. I was a bear. I mean, I'm right there. I was a bear.
I saw you. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, well, I don't hate them, but I know they're going to eat me. You know, they're going to come after me, and I'm gonna run. But there wasn't one up there, and we ran. But anyway, we get done. We went out to breakfast. Nice little place. I can't remember the name of it now. I don't know if you're on. We're close enough in age. You should remember the Nip and Sip.
Oh yeah.
And it
Got
was.
some pictures of the nip and sip.
Do you? That's awesome. So it's just a dirty old diner, right? I mean, it wasn't dirty, but it was what you think of a diner.
The textbook definition of a hole in the wall.
There it is. That's
always
exactly
where
it.
the best food is.
And that's where we went. We were literally sitting next to the grill as everybody's food was getting cooked. Right in the front window, there's the grill. It's to my back, and the lady's walking right by me. It was nonstop. One of the best breakfasts I've had in a long time, man. It was so good. Well, we get done there, we go across the street, and all my girls are into books, they're huge readers, and I'm not a big reader. I'll listen. I can listen all day long. I'm very auditory in that way. But they go over there, they go through the bookstore, and I get done. I see this little, I don't know, just a little, I won't say a junk store, but it was.
Thrift shop.
Yeah, sort of. It's almost like a man cave shop.
Yeah.
But it was like that tin stuff that's welded, spot welded,
Mm-hmm.
and like roosters and dogs and, and of course Yetis. I love Yetis, but they come out. I'm sitting outside in this little courtyard area, and she comes up to me and she says, "I almost bought you a book." And I wasn't sure. I said, probably for the best. And she goes, "Well, this one was different. It was the history of Blackford County, and it was full of stories of like personal journals from people in Blackford County." And I was like, "I'm interested. Let's go see." And you just hear, did you hear that? You feel that door shut? Yeah. Yeah, I jumped a little bit too. You can hear everything here. So I go over there, and I don't know where it is. Of course, she does. She finds it, brings it over. I flipped through about 3 pages. I said, "Yeah, I want it.
Oh yeah.
$125. I didn't care. It could have been twice that. I wanted it. And I'm glad I grabbed it. And you're more than welcome. Take it with you and check it out, dude. I know you'll appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, and it's such a valuable resource because it's at that point in time where in 1900, so Blackford County was 60 years old, right? About that, thereabouts, 60, 70. But there hadn't been, or I hadn't seen really any concerted effort on preserving that history. They were just busy living,
Yeah.
doing their thing. But Benjamin Shin had the foresight to say, we need to start memorializing this stuff, right?
Right.
And then I'd say the next was probably Cecil Beeson, right?
Yeah.
He was the next link that preserved what he had said and took it to where I have vague memories of Cecil Beeson, right?
Same. Yeah, I could picture him in my head.
Yes.
But he was a very old man then.
Yes.
At least he appeared to be. He might have been in his 70s. I remember thinking a 50-year-old man looked really old. I turned 50 in a couple months. And I know I don't look old.
Well, I agree with you because it's funny. I've said this to my wife, but like when Archie Bunker started, he was 47.
Right.
And I'm thinking, good Lord,
Right.
I'm older than Archie Bunker. And I think the youngest Golden Girl was like 52.
Right.
So it's hard to fathom and comprehend, but yeah, to me he was a senior citizen. But I have a picture of him in I want to say the 30s. So yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He's a mailman.
Is that the one where he's next to the mail truck
Yeah.
or his
Yeah.
car, like
Yeah.
a Model A or something?
Yes.
I've seen a picture like that. I can remember going there when I was in elementary school. We took a tour down there, and I was so excited to see the old Airedale upstairs. And I don't know if it's still there or not, but
I don't know.
there was an air. It was like the mascot, You know, it was on wheels, but it was like a stuffed Airedale, like a legit real dog that had been.
I've heard stories of it. I haven't seen it.
Okay. So it was there in the 80s when I was at William Reed because I was so excited. My mom would tell me about it. And then I go upstairs and there it was. It's on like wheels. And they would truck it out there during games and stuff. But evidently there was a real dog as well that belonged to the janitor or something like that.
Yeah, I got that story. If I find it, I'll reprint it. But yeah, that was the story. I think his name was Jack,
Maybe.
an Airedale,
Yeah.
and he was brought to the games. And Rick Teets, he gave me a backstory on it before. When I post it, I'll get
Yeah.
like messages saying, "Hey, this is what I heard." And
Yeah.
Bill Clapper is another one.
Okay.
So that's what I like about the history is I put it out there because it meant something to me, and then I realized it means something to a lot of people.
It means a lot to a lot of people.
And I just start posting stuff, and I've been asked, "Why do you do it?" And it's like, well, I enjoy it first of all, and there's enough on Facebook that I don't need to chip in on a lot of opinions or things like this. Is just happy, and I don't know how you can be sad with it. And
Yeah, absolutely. So have you kind of taken over the historical society, or
no.
is Mrs. Costello still in charge of that?
Senior Costello is still there, very active.
Okay.
Mr. Tabor, you remember Mr.
Yeah,
Tabor?
absolutely.
He's involved, which ties into we're doing a major renovation project for the courthouse,
Yep.
and part of that renovation was a appraisal. We had to have appraisers come in and do that. We thought it was a good idea to include Sinyard and Mr. Tabor because they had backstory on maybe they could answer some questions. So we had to take a tour of the courthouse with them, and of course they stories here and stories there, and it was interesting to see their passion for it too.
Mm-hmm.
So we got the appraisal, and that project's moving forward, and that's going to be it's expensive, but like I've said since I got on the county council, it's not going to go anywhere. We need to preserve it. It is our iconic symbol.
It really is.
Have you seen the pictures of like from like in the 20s? I mean, it just became like a hub, right? There was the hotel, and then people would just hang out on the lawn, take it easy. There was festivals even back then.
Right.
I don't think they called it Heritage Days, but
No, gosh, and I remember hearing stories about it from my mother, and I don't remember if it was just called the Hartford City Fair or not. But that was a long running thing, and I can remember that when we were kids. We still had a Hartford City Fair uptown, prior to Heritage Days coming out.
see, I just remember Heritage Days.
Yeah.
I don't. I've heard the same stories. I forget. I'm with you. I don't remember what they called it, but it was a big deal.
I think it was the Hartford City Street Fair.
I think that sounds about
That's
right.
what she referred to it as.
And it was big.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big deal. But that was at a time when there was so much downtown.
Yeah, it's pre-'80s.
Yes.
Some of my fondest memories are Heritage Days.
I know, right?
You know, my mom would set up there. She had, you know, all this different stuff she'd pick up at rummage sales. Dolls. She would buy dolls that needed totally redone, and she would. Sorry, I think it was my. Why is it making noise? This is what happens on the Chick Show.
Always.
Like,
It always happens.
what the heck, brother? You making noise up here? I'll turn all that crap off. We don't need them stinking things. We survived without them.
We did.
I mean, we made it through a big part of our lives, a really important part of our lives, without phones. And I'm so thankful that there were not phones.
Yeah, yeah. College would have been a different experience in the 90s
Oh,
if
man.
there was Facebook. Good or bad.
Sure.
But I was thinking the other day, I travel a lot for my job. And Google Maps, address, bam, go, here you go, got directions. And I'm thinking, 15 years ago, I would have had to have a map or printed it off of TripAdvisor or whatever they call it, but it was still paper. And then you had to find, okay, where am I? I got to turn right here, and I got to go 2 miles. But now it's like in 100 feet, turn right.
Yep.
But we did it.
We did it.
Uh,
When I started working for JD Byrider, the finance side of it, and I was out in the field collecting, repoing cars, and knocking on doors. I had to go to South Bend. I'd never been to South Bend before. And going up South Bend, first place I stopped was at a gas station, and I got a map,
Yeah.
and it quartered off the city, so that I started understanding, where the zip codes were, just like Muncie split into 4 zip codes, and you could very quickly, all right, if this is, I can put all my zip codes together, and that's where this address is going to be, and this zip code, this zip code, this zip, but I had to have it on that map. And it took me about 2 years to learn the city well enough to not have to have that map. And there were still occasions I had to pull it out. But by that time, I think we were, gosh, closing in on, well, I did it for 8 years. And even at 2009, I don't even remember having maps on my phone in 2009. I'm sure I did, but I don't remember. At that point, I kind of knew where I was going all the time. But boy, that map reading piece
Yeah.
was important. Our dad's in the back of the car, or, whoever, somebody had the map. Somebody had the atlas.
You had to have a navigator.
Oh, 100%. Where are we at on Interstate 65?
I remember I was when I was in the Hartford City Police Department. We were working a case, and it took us down around Lapel Exit. There's a truck stop there. It was in that area. There's a pond there, and we were there, and one of the other detectives, and I forget where he was from because it was a concerted effort. It might have been Madison County Sheriff's, but he had a smartphone, and I'm like, I'd heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like 2008, I think.
Yeah.
And he goes, we had a dive team because we were searching for evidence, and it looked like it was cloudy. And he pulled out his phone. He goes, "Yeah, here's the radar." I'm going, "Are you kidding me? You got a weather radar on your phone?" I was just,
Right.
I felt naive and silly, but wow, that is something else. So you're talking 2008.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weather was in your pocket.
We take that all the way back. 1836, Blackford County.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Around 1836. I'm not even looking at the timeline, man. I'm trying to do it by memory. And then we'll fact check ourselves.
Okay, I like this. So
That scares the crap out of me.
1832 was the Reasoners
Yep.
came up.
Yep.
33 was a guy named Blunt, Andrew Blunt, and his family on the other end of the county.
So is that the people coming up from coming across from Vermont and that area? And
I think
okay.
so. Yeah.
All right. So we still got natives living in the county.
Vaguely. They didn't like the encroachment because within a few years it seemed like there was a lot of white settlers coming in. And I think the Godfrey Reserve by that time was kind of on its way down.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But by then the hunting wasn't as good, I think they said. And in that book that you have, I think they even comment like, yeah, there's just too many settlers and we just want to move forward. And by that time, Godfrey had already moved to Peru.
Okay.
I've been to his grave.
Really?
Here's an interesting story. So when I was working as a business development manager, part of my area of responsibility was Peru. And I'm heading that way from the Muncie area, and I go, I'm gonna take 124 in, and I'm kind of just driving along and going into Peru a way I'd never really gone before, and I just happened to look over, and it was one of those historical markers, and I just saw Godfrey. I'm like, stop the car. I'm like, what? I turn around, I go in there, I look. There was a cemetery, and there was his grave site, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I get out, take some pictures, and I thought, that is interesting right there. I just stumbled upon it.
Right.
Right there it is.
So I'm not and I know I'm not the only one that has to stop at every historical
Oh, no, I do.
marker. It's like, oh my God, we go down south for vacation or something, and we're traveling around, and I see a historical marker. I'm like, oh, I got to check it out. I saw something about the Civil War on it.
Yeah.
I got to stop. She's like, oh my God. You know?
I do it all the time.
But there are times when we luck out. It's happened where I've had to go look at something and explore it, and man, we ran into a Civil War reenactment. How's that happen? We were, I think that was that may have been in Florida, and she'll correct me, I'm sure, once she listens to this. But I think we were in Florida, and we end up out in this historical, area, reading signs on how to get there, and next thing you know, it's like a 1812 or Civil War. I can't remember which it was. It was somewhere, one of those two, and it was really cool. I mean, they were firing off cannons, and you got to see the muskets up close. They were letting you hold a couple of them. It was a neat experience for my kids. So I'm a junkie that way.
We do it too, and a lot of our family vacations, we'll try to incorporate a little bit of history.
Yeah.
We were in the Jacksonville area, St. Augustine. They have St. Augustine is the oldest continually
Yeah.
inhabited city.
What a strange, like, just being, and I'm sure you've been to other places, but we spent a lot of time in Savannah, a lot of time in Charleston,
Yes.
well, once in Charleston, sorry, but Wilmington. So, like, we have spotted, down the southeast, and that's a different animal.
Yeah.
It's different. It's built different.
Well, yeah, that city itself, if you go towards downtown St. Augustine, they have that Castillo de San Marcos. We took a tour of it. Just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. And we do that. And we went to St. Louis a couple years ago.
Well, that's a great place too.
Doing some, like, oh, well, Ulysses S. Grant's farm is right over here.
Yeah.
So we went to his old
Yeah.
farmhouse, Grant's old farmhouse, and took that tour. And
Yep.
we've been to, ironically, so we've been to Lincoln's home birthplace in Kentucky.
Yep.
Took that tour. In Springfield, we were at his tomb and went to his house and his museum there. We haven't been to where he was in Indiana. We've completely skipped the Indiana segment of his journey, but we'll get there eventually. But
Yeah.
little things like that, we like going to things. And
Have you seen the monuments of Lincoln in Louisville?
Yeah.
Sorry for my Southern Indiana friends. Louisville. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I didn't expect to run into that, and then you cross the river and go over to Jeffersonville, and there's on the banks of the Ohio and all the fossils and stuff. Have you been over there?
no, but I have read it.
Really cool.
Clifty Falls, is that what it is?
Well, no, Clifty Falls is back in Jefferson County, so that's in Madison. But this is the Falls of the Ohio.
Falls of the Ohio.
And it's kind of right where the locks are, but it's just it's just fossils. Like, you walk out onto a fossil bed, and you're literally walking on fossilized earth of all these different, organisms that were alive at one time, that have fossilized right there in the sands or whatever, in the limestone. It's really cool.
So does that go back to where I think at one point wasn't the Midwest the ocean at some point?
I don't know that. I've read, and I think you may have posted it, something about the huge river that ran through our area.
The Taze River.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the case or not. And, you go back far enough, 12,000 years ago or something, possibly. I mean, heck, I just learned yesterday that horses originated in the Southwest. We said they came from Asia. But in fact, this historian, I can't remember his first name, his last name is West, was talking about horses originating in the Southwest. And they were very different. They were about the size of a collie. And as climate change occurred, and, here comes, all these different phases of, the Earth's changing, they crossed over Beringia and over into Asia, and then started developing into what we know as a horse now. Well, then they're reintroduced by the Spanish,
Yeah.
in the 1500s, 1600s, whichever. I'm terrible with my history right now. It's interesting. I haven't been in the classroom in 5-6 years now, and the amount of things, it's just like basketball. Mm-hmm. If you're not shooting free throws, you're not hitting free throws. If you're not talking history and practicing it every day, it gets muddy.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting just talking about, this guy was talking about, it was on the Joe Rogan show, and talking about, how they then migrated back over through the Spanish and flourished in the grasslands again. Really interesting how.
I think I saw that episode because he talks about wolves and coyotes.
Yeah.
Or is it a different?
No, it might be maybe something different, because this guy it was all history, but he did talk about wolves. He was talking about the Canadian wolves they've reintroduced up in the Dakotas and Wyoming, and how they're huge.
Yeah, they're massive.
I mean, this area had wolves. There's documents. When I was down in Madison, I was reading documentation about people traveling from Kentucky and crossing the river. They would send sick cows, or the weaker cows, across first to basically feed them to the wolves, so they can get the wolves to come out, and then they could shoot them.
Yeah.
And then once they could shoot them, the wolves knew they had a predator, and they wouldn't bother them.
Well, yeah, I have entries in that thing I gave you from some of the very first county commissioner meetings in this county dealt with the wolf problem.
Yeah, and that crazy.
They were paying for scalps, right? So
Right.
people would make a living hunting wolves and turning in their scalps and getting paid for it.
We just don't think about that as a problem.
No,
Do you remember Chris Coy? Mr. Coy brought in a coyote,
I remember.
and it was like the first coyote. We had heard there were coyotes back in the county in the late 80s,
Yeah.
but it wasn't an issue because we hadn't seen coyotes in this area in decades, maybe 100 years at that point, maybe not that long. But so him bringing one in that had been hit by a car meant that the population was large enough to where one got hit by a car.
That was the one I saw, yeah.
Yeah. So I always thought that was really bizarre. And then turkeys. I can recall going to Kentucky and staying down in Gatlinburg, and we saw turkeys at our cabin. And it wasn't long after that we started seeing more turkeys here.
Yeah.
And being down in Madison, hearing about all the bobcats that are living down in Madison, and that a bear has crossed the river at one point and been spotted in either Jefferson County or Switzerland County, one or the other. It's really interesting to me when we talk about just the world in general and the impact that human beings can have on animals. It's scary, man. I mean, the fact that we can impact an animal population in that way, and then realize at some point, okay, I think we screwed that up.
Yeah.
We gotta fix some issues here. To the point to where now we have bobcats back, we have turkeys back, we have coyotes and eagles, for God's sakes.
I've seen the eagles. I saw an old picture. A deer spotted in Blackford County was front page news, and this was, I want to say, late 60s, early 70s. A deer being spotted was
Are you for real?
serious.
See, I've never heard anything like that. I just
Even deer. But now you can't. I about hit one every morning I go to work, right?
100%.
But they're everywhere. But coyotes they're everywhere too.
Oh man, yeah. When I lived out on 26, we'd hear them chattering all the time. I had them 20, 30 yards from my house.
And they're clever,
Oh,
very clever.
yeah. Yeah, we could have swore at one point like they were trying to coax.
Well, so Joe Rogan, right? He has a story that a coyote, he called it honey potted his dog because he had chickens because he lived out in the area, and he said that he watched this coyote for like 2 days, making friends with his dog, been a fence, right? And just being friendly with him, and the dog was like, "Hey, this is okay, it's cool," and doing his thing. But there was a chicken house. Coyote knew he wasn't big enough to knock over the chicken house, and then eventually, he said it took like 3 days. This coyote hit Joe Rogan's dog into knocking over that chicken house, and then he ate every chicken.
Oh my God.
And this is what he's saying, and he lives by that. But how
Right.
clever he literally,
I don't doubt
that
it.
animal had the foresight for days to work this plan. And is that true? I don't know, but that was the result.
I wouldn't put it past them.
Well, that biologist I talked about was talking about wolves and coyotes, and of course he's given the Darwinian evolution
Yeah.
perspective that, well, coyotes had to become more clever because they weren't as big and vicious as wolves, but they had to cohabitate. So they were like, this is the branch that they kind of went, that direction they traveled, which makes sense from an evolutionary
Sure.
point of view.
It makes me think of lions and hyenas.
Yeah.
They're cohabitating. They're predatory animals. One's more of a cleanup.
Yeah.
One is driving the trash truck.
Like the, what's the fish that stick to sharks?
Yeah.
Pilot fish.
Yep, pilot fish.
They just make a living off of sharks. And
Living.
did you know sharks are older than trees? Did you know that?
That's interesting.
That's another thing things I hear.
It's crazy how stuff like that sticks with you. You know what I mean?
That was one I just like, because I listen to podcasts a lot when I travel, and I'm thinking, that sharks have roamed the seas longer than trees have been
Wow.
around. That's just mind blowing to me. But
So Blackford County,
yeah, let's bring it back home.
bringing it back around. So all these different things happening. So Blackford County wasn't, immune to that. They had wolf issues. They had, I would assume, bears.
I have read some black bears. Um, there's like a similar book like the what you have here, but it was from Randolph County,
Okay.
and it's been probably 10 years ago since I read it. But there was some stories of some black bears and some Indian conflicts, and right up into the 1820s, 1830s
Sure.
still. So they were in the area.
I'm picturing, and I don't know if Shane Robbins, I think today or maybe yesterday, posted a picture of the map of Indiana as,
I've seen it, yes.
yeah. So one of my teachers in Madison, Chuck Noonan, had multiples of those from basically the first incarnation to the next incarnation to the next to full statehood,
Yeah.
right? So he had the one that had Jay County with no Blackford County. And then obviously the last one he had everything on there and it was much more modern. But he got those from the State House. He just happened to be there. I don't know if he was on a field trip or what the scenario was. But the guy was a teacher for many, many years and happened to be at the State House and they were putting them in the dumpsters. We're talking full door size
Yeah.
maps of the state of Indiana. It was the coolest thing ever. So when Shane posted that yesterday, I said, Chuck Noonan, if you ever think about getting ready your maps, put me on the list, brother.
I don't know if you got room. You'd have
I'll
to put 'em
find
up.
room.
Yeah.
I will find room. I'll put them on the ceilings. I don't care. They'll go in here somewhere. We'll make that happen. But I think it's really interesting to see in that way. You ever look at the maps of like what this country looks like compared to this country, or the various types of maps people put together, and I think it's really interesting to see how Indiana became, worked through into its statehood. Um, and we were a territory and moved into that. Interestingly enough, I found out something as well. California was never a territory,
This is a republic, right?
became a state, went straight to statehood. Interesting. Anyway, there we go on another tangent, but
Well, there's reasons why.
well, yeah,
It was the slavery issue and
population.
population
I mean,
and resources.
Yeah, yeah. And you want to let that one go? I mean, you got a state the size of Italy that's full of gold. Statehood
Yeah, here you go.
done.
What else can we do for you, sir?
So anyhow, I think it's really interesting in watching how that evolution happens. I've always been curious, and I'm hoping you know the answer to this. I've always been curious how Blackford County becomes a county. Obviously, I know that it's part of Jay County prior to becoming its own, but what was the reasoning behind, and part of Delaware County as well, I believe. What was the reasoning behind Blackford County splitting away?
So the stories I've heard was we were by and large Jay County. We were like a large township, and Jay County just found it untenable. It was too far. It was inconvenient. I read at one time that it was just a swampland.
Yeah.
It wasn't really good for farming, and they weren't bent really or married to the idea of keeping it. And then there's a mile, so like we shaved a mile off of Delaware County,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest was all Jay. Why it eventually came about, I don't really know, other than we were just getting settlers in here, and then we had Hartford City and Montpelier were developing and growing, and at some point they asked for it to be organized, and then the governor said, "Okay, we'll do it." And he appointed the sheriff, Nicholas Friend, and I think he even appointed like the first commissioners. But then that order came with, now you need to have an election, organize it, get it going.
And this is when the coffee pot comes into play.
Yeah, the famous Andrew Boggs coffee pot. As best I could figure, I I get lost on when I'm reading things and I'm trying to visualize where is that.
Yeah.
So like Andrew Boggs's log cabin, I think it was behind Richards. If I'm trying to read things right, maybe in that area, just
Yeah.
behind back a little
That's
bit.
where my mind takes me.
Yeah. So I think that was his log cabin, and then of course the courthouse was built because it was kind of the high ground.
Yep.
That's where they developed it, and the prominent landowners donated land because this is where the chase came in to be the county seat,
Right.
and they were like, "We'll give you so many acres. Let's put it right here." And built that first log cabin courthouse, and it took them a while to finally decide where the county seat would be. Montpelier had a viable claim because they said we were platted first.
Right.
Right? We were up and running and had the streets laid out, and Hartford City said, "Sure, but we got some more people. We already got a place for the courthouse." And it took them. The state sent commissioners like 4 times to come down, assess it, interview it, and finally they said, "Look, I think in 18, you have to read it here, but I think 1841." They finally said, okay, it's going to be Hartford City.
Yeah.
And that's when it was like, they were saying, okay, courthouse. And then it just went from there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So in this book over here, I was reading through, and it was talking about street width. I mean, like platting the city out, 15 feet wide alleys, 50-foot wide streets. All these different things, and I'm like, man, just thinking about being down in oh God, St. Augustine, and seeing the widths of the streets there,
Mm-hmm.
and the foresight of the people who are platting out Hartford City, and even Montpelier. Montpelier is very well
Yes.
laid out as well. Who at that time, we're not thinking about cars. The car is a very obscure thing at that time, and let alone a semi truck.
Yeah.
But the idea that they laid out this city with wide enough streets to operate large vehicles that we have today. To take an SUV down a street in St. Augustine, it's not going to happen.
Tight turns.
Charleston's very similar, very tight
Yeah.
streets. Savannah's a little bit of an anomaly, but so when you see these older towns, they didn't have that. Some of them didn't have that foresight to create a wide enough area. New Orleans is a great example. Holy crap. There are a couple streets there that are two-way. I don't understand who is still running that place and going, yeah, it's a two-way street, and with parking on each side. What are you thinking? But I just always thought it was really interesting when I go to these different places and see how the city is laid out. Obviously, this whole grid system we have here makes it very simple to navigate the town and to lay things out and to plot, property. Whereas this neighborhood that we're in, well, you got to have the sweeping lines and the curvy street and everything else. It feels better. It's
But it's more of a modern concept.
100%. But the foresight for our people of Blackford County to lay it out in that way, I thought was really interesting with the alleys and
Yeah. And I think the layout would come with just the natural growth of the city. Like, in my mind, I have the south side almost being its own little town.
Sure.
I mean, it was literally, it had their own grocery stores.
Yep.
The Belgium and French immigrants that worked in the glass factories, they were there.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And the north part, they kind of did their thing. And probably back then, you're talking, there was probably only one road that really connected them. It was probably Monroe Street.
Yeah. Yeah, because you had to have a bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not just building bridges for the sake of building bridges.
No, because that's expensive.
It's very expensive.
It is very expensive, especially then. A lot of manpower, right?
Oh, 100%.
So if they didn't have to build a bridge, they weren't going to build a bridge.
Yeah. A friend of mine was talking about his great grandmother didn't speak much English, and how he remembers her speaking, because I'd talked to him about, hey, look, South Side, being French or Belgium speaking, and
Yeah.
most of the folks that were down there, they had their own community, their own culture, their own literal community that operated on its own. And he said, "Oh yeah, my great grandma, she didn't speak much English. The English she spoke was broken." And I just thought that was
And that's a
interesting.
great grandmother. I mean, that's not.
Right? Yeah. So you're only what, think of a generation as 30 years basically. So at that time, probably late 1800s, she would have been, born.
Yeah, my third. So, have you done the ancestry.com?
I've looked at it. So my brother did it, and then I was able to look at his. I haven't done it. Why? I don't know. It's one of those things where I want to do it. I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm a little worried. What am I going to find out?
Yeah. Well, they say that with any genealogy research, just be prepared.
Yeah.
I've done it, and it takes up time, but you lose time so quick. Because when
Yeah.
I first started getting into it, I realized like, oh, it's been 2 hours, because it just leads to something else,
Right.
and other documents, and then you'll get hints, and tips, and like,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I have a pretty firm grasp on my genealogy. Because I try to verify it with 2 or 3 sources. Because a lot of times you'll get hints. You're related to Scott Schick. And you're like, is that true? But you'll find out somebody else put something in wrong.
Okay.
But there's sources. So if you could confirm it, like, well, there's a census. And like, okay. I think your grandmother was Marguerite.
Yeah.
I met her once on a case.
Yeah.
She was scanned by some hustlers doing a roof.
Yeah. Yeah. Marguerite Fox.
So I met your dad and
Yeah.
your grandma on that. But so like if that was put in wrong, then it would kind of skew it. But if you get 2 sources, like, well, there's census, and okay, that jives up, and maybe you are. So you kind of confirm it,
Yeah.
and then you get a tree. And my tree goes back quite a ways. And the further you go back, I question sometimes, like, maybe.
Sure.
But it all makes sense, at least up to like 200 or 300 years, which it's scary how quick
For
you get
yours. Yeah.
200 years. But really, you're talking that's only
100%.
a couple generations. Like,
Yeah.
I'm already back to the 1700s. It goes quick.
It really does.
But then I learned, like, so the closest ancestors I have was my third great grandfather and grandmother. He was French, worked the glass factories. That's how he kind of came here. And I think probably a lot of us owe our existence to the glass
Sure.
factories and the gas boom. It drew them here, and then they would meet their significant, have kids, and then so that's how if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
And then I have a third great grandma and grandpa from Ireland. Those are the closest. So I don't have any like real recent immigrants. And then on my mother's side, they were from Tennessee and Kentucky. And apparently we've been in America for centuries. So they came over early.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What I was reading something recently that was talking about how, and going back to that map that we were talking about, how southern Indiana is an influence from the South, and people coming from Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, the Carolinas, West Virginia. And then as you move towards the center, it's that wave of people moving from Pennsylvania and Ohio and
Great Lakes are there. Yep.
Yep. And then the others are northern Indiana is more of an influx coming both ways from Michigan and even Chicago, and traveling across from New York, and just how different cultures. And God, I'm just tying this together in my head. I met somebody from Ohio, and we were talking, I can't remember, Dirk, if it's you, I can't remember, but maybe it was. But he said, why do people from Indiana always say I'm from central Indiana, southern Indiana, northern Indiana? And boy, now it makes a lot of sense just thinking about it in that wave of how people have moved into Indiana and how their identity captures that.
That's something I never looked at that way, I guess. If I talk to people from other places, I've always said East Central Indiana.
Right.
But I didn't think of it as a migratory story, but rather just to give an idea where I'm at.
And that's what I thought, but I almost wonder if it's just part of, it's in our DNA from generationally. You know what I mean? Because I heard it somewhere.
Yeah.
It would have to have been from my dad or grandpa or,
Yeah.
somebody has said that. And they were like, yeah, we don't do that. We're from Ohio, or we're from Michigan or Kentucky or whatever. Indiana is very regional in that way. And
Well, we're not unique though. Like, so
I don't
my
think so
family in
either.
Tennessee, it's East and West Tennessee.
Do
Right?
they? Do they?
Yeah.
Do they claim it that way?
Because
I could see that.
it's such a long
Oh
state,
man,
right?
that's incredible distance
Yeah.
to travel across. And maybe the same thing with Indiana. I wonder if people in Georgia do that. Because Georgia feels like forever.
Yeah.
Um, but Ohio's really not that way. They're a square.
Just Ohio, but it's if you've driven through Ohio.
Oh, it's very different.
It takes forever.
It does take forever, and it's very different topography when you drive to through southern Ohio. On your way to Carolinas or whatever, you take 35 out of there. There's a lot of hills.
There
It's
is.
some beautiful country, but you get back in northern Ohio, it's not.
No.
It's just like northern Indiana. It's just
Glaci-
farmland.
Glaciation
100%, right?
totally affected the topography.
So thinking about that, thinking about how we were talking about this being swampland
Yeah.
and just the deposits, the accounts I'm reading in that book, we're talking about people ditching their property with wooden logs and creating these ditches so they would come out and just like slash and burn acres of land at a time. All types of incredible wood that would just be piled up and burnt to get it out of the way. And nearly every account that I read that talks about that, they were like, why'd we do that? Why'd we do that? Well, you had to get it gone. And
Yeah. How do you go?
it was going to sit and you would have to move it. And it was probably easier and more efficient to just burn it. And, think about this whole area being just wood. And you come in, you're creating farmland out of it. Well, if you can't get rid of the water, you're not going to grow anything. Everything's
Right.
just going to rot in the ground. But it was really interesting hearing about how they would create ditches with wood.
It probably hard for us to sit here today and think about how much work these farmers put in
Brother.
through the decades in the 19th century to create farmland. And we've got pretty good farmland today.
Right.
But back in the day, it was very dense and swampy. We still have bogs. Sunken Road.
Yeah.
You've heard the stories of Sunken Road.
Keep moving.
Well, it just disappears. They tried to build a bridge and it would be gone. I mean, it's hard for us to think that.
Right.
Out by the cemetery on 26th going out of town, it's still kind of a wetland, but it was,
100%.
they would build a road and within a month they'd have to build it again. I think they called it the Trenton Road.
Wow. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we still have issues with it today, eroding. In the 90s, I can remember that thing being shut down because it had started to erode, and even out there at Lake Placid corner, huge issues out there with erosion of the road and with flooding.
Yeah, but it's all those bogs that we still got today that kind of affect things. Not as bad as they used to, and that's all because of the glaciers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another rabbit hole I got down. Like, we're trying to sit 12,000 years ago. If we were sitting here today, there'd be like a mile of ice.
Right.
And that, again, that's just one of those hard things. Like trying to get my head around 5,000 feet of ice, and we're under it. And that's what made everything. That's why Blackford's so flat. It just scraped.
Yeah.
And did everything. And
When you go down, and I spent 3 years down on the Ohio River, when you look out across there and you start looking up the other side, so you're on one side of the river and you're looking up the other, and you're like, man, that's 1,000 feet of incline, about a 5% to 10% incline, maybe more than that. God, it's way more than that. I'm thinking about the road going up is about a 5-6%. You're just looking at this wedge, like this valley, the Ohio River Valley, literally.
yeah,
And you're like, this thing had to be full of water at one time,
had to be.
because there's no other way that you're creating this valley other than water washing it away. And you're talking about that mile of ice and everything washing down that way and feeding that thing. That had to be a monster, dude.
Just the grind and the
God.
I mean, that's the mountains, and that's why we've got hills in southern Indiana because you could almost, not knowing anything about glaciation, look at a topographical map and be like, that's weird how it just stops right there at
Right.
70, right? Almost.
Right.
And that's, well, if you read it, well, that's where as far as it got in Indiana, they think.
Yeah.
And it pushed all that stuff and made the hills, and
It's mind blowing.
it really is.
Knowing the amount of effort it takes to just create a driveway.
Yeah.
Just a driveway, to trench out a driveway, to cut that ground away, to start laying that bed. And then you're talking about maybe a foot and a half, 2 foot cut.
Yeah, and we're talking about metrics and quantities that it's really hard for
It's
us to
unfathomable.
like so the Missoula. Have you ever heard of Lake Missoula out in like Wyoming?
Okay.
So it's all glaciers, right? You're talking hundreds and hundreds, if not more, of square miles. It's hard for me to put a number on it, right? But you know, all of Canada,
Yeah.
half of North America, 1,000 feet of ice or 5,000 feet of ice.
Right.
Well, eventually, some of that chasms start to form, and then some of it melts. Well, there was like a lake the size of, I want to say, Indiana
Okay.
or Ohio. But if it gives way, if like a levee breaks, then it just drains, and it drains within like a week, and the erosion that would come
Oh God.
with that, and if you really get in it, Randall Carlson is a
Oh
phenomenal.
yeah, that's another great listen right
Oh
there.
my God! So he'll explain like the Spokane, Washington ripples and all it just washed everything out to the ocean, and you're thinking, wow. And then you couple that with Graham Hancock. I have mixed feelings about Graham. Right? It's like
Sure.
it sounds crazy, but he's almost being proven right time and time again.
Right.
But then like the meteors, right? If you get a good meteor to hit, well, it's going to evaporate and cause instant melting. Where's that water going to go?
Right.
Like there's one theory, it was Randall Carlson, like so Michigan's always, has it's the mitten. Well, that was like they think it was a meteor strike.
Interesting. I'd never heard that.
And they go in this whole other rabbit hole, right? So you can like, it would send like icebergs 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 feet in the air, and it would land in like North Carolina. So you'd be hitting with a chunk of ice in North Carolina that came from Michigan.
That's the size of, we can't even imagine.
No,
the
can't even
size,
imagine.
I mean, it's bigger than a skyscraper.
But they track it, right? It's almost like a forensic police
So
investigation.
they're looking at the minerals.
Well, they'll look at minerals, and then they'll like it leaves craters,
Yeah.
and then so they'll go out from the opening in Michigan where they think it struck, and you'll see where they plot on the map like blood splatter, so to speak,
Wow.
and it adds up.
Do you think sometimes we don't realize how small we are?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're so ego driven. I don't think we realize how small we are.
It's about 99% of every species that's ever existed has gone extinct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're at some point this Earth is going to just shiver a little bit because we're going to become a nuisance.
Yeah. It's just bizarre to think about. And it's such a big idea that it's hard to comprehend.
Yeah, and anything with space, right?
Uh,
You start getting into that black energy, black matter, just distances, right? How big we think our solar system. I mean, but
we made the model. We know how far things are.
We lost
It's
the
only
planet.
about 6 inches from one planet to the next, right?
We lost the planet, right?
Uh,
But what we don't know is what's staggering. Is it's all theory and it's
yeah.
black holes, and we're a very small planet in an average size solar system in a medium sized galaxy,
Yeah.
and there's billions of galaxies.
Yeah.
You're right. There's other
Here
life
we
out
are
there. Right?
thinking
Do you
how
believe that?
important we are.
Do you believe there's life out there somewhere?
I have a hard time not believing it. I am one of those folks that I'll keep my mind open and not deny it to the like I'm not going to sit here and go there's not life out there. I can't say that because I don't know that. And I can't say there is, but I'll leave the possibility open because I believe there could be. I believe there's potential for that. I don't believe that I am smart enough
Yeah.
to not believe it,
Oh yeah.
to prove it wrong. You know what I mean? I don't think there's near enough information out there for someone to say they don't exist.
I agree. If I had to put money on it, statistically speaking, right, there has to be somewhere. You're talking our our planet is about 4.5 billion years old,
Yeah.
and they say the galaxy. I think recent estimates are like 13.8 billion is how old the universe is.
And that tick turd of existence that we are in
Yes,
that timeline.
think about that.
We are so minute in that timeline.
Well, you think about this. So theoretically, there are other planets probably similar to ours that has like several billion year head start on us.
Yeah. Where they at now? You know what I mean? Where they at now? And I've often wondered too. We didn't always have an atmosphere that was what we have now.
Yes.
You know, um, and even in our lifetime, we have seen changes in our atmosphere. And I don't know about the whole ozone layer thing, but they said there was a hole there, and that it has closed back up for the most part. Um, I'm not smart enough to prove or disprove it.
Yeah.
And people talk about research. Research takes many, many years of expertise to do research. You have given me. You say there's 20 pages here,
Probably 20.
and with some citation, everything else. How long did it take you to do this?
Oh, years. I mean, it's.
Yeah, and it's of Blackford County.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Of information that's out there, and we've only existed for 250, 250. Oh well,
not even.
Yeah, not even that.
150 years.
150. Yeah, going on maybe 170, roughly, people being here. So you're talking about 160 years. We'll meet in the middle of existence wrapped up into 20 pages. You're talking about our Earth and millions of years of trying to figure out what's happened. You're not putting that in 20 pages. You know what I mean? It's not one guy that's going to do it. And, with some passion towards it. This is someone's life work trying to figure out. I am nowhere near the guy that's going to go, oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, can't be.
Can't be.
I mean,
Well, that's what I guess I find interesting about those things in the numbers that we have to try to understand is how little I understand. I mean, I probably the even bestest and brightest they just theorize on like
right.
gravitational pull and waves and black energy and what does that mean for us and what is on the other side of a black hole. I mean, we know they exist, but that's just speculation. What happens to you?
Right.
They can't answer that.
Well, and those who would find out through personal accounts would never be able to tell you.
I know, right? Or would they?
Uh,
Nobody's ever done it that we know of.
Right. Yeah. Well, I always refer to the wise words of Ted Nugent. Some people say we got to die someday. He's got news. He never got to go. So, it's Ted Nugent, folks.
Well, okay, I guess to quote another musician, Hank Williams said, "Ain't nobody getting out of this world alive."
That's exactly it. Oh my God. So Blackford County exists. We end up in a gas boom era.
Yeah.
And, why is there gas here? Is it through that swampation?
I think so.
I'm making words up again on the podcast. Swampation.
I like that.
Yeah. Try that one.
Google that.
Yeah.
He's our Jamie from the
He
Druid.
is. Yeah.
Google
I keep
that.
saying
Google that, Easton.
I need an intern. Swampation. Yeah. See if that's a word I just made up.
No, I guess I'm not an expert on that, but yeah, I think it just came down to how all oil was formed, and
Sure.
with that oil came gas. And
Have you read the accounts of cities lighting so many like gas pipes
Well, right here in Hartford City,
to light up the whole city.
they had what they called the Great Flambeau, and it burned down there by
Is that on Leonard?
yeah
In my head, it's on Leonard
yeah
Street.
right there. There's like a garage there, Leonard and I will say High Street,
Yeah.
and it would just burn, and they let it burn. And again, I'm gonna have to estimate. I read somewhere where they think almost 80% was wasted because they didn't understand saving it right.
Right.
To their defense, how would they?
Right.
They don't even know what they're dealing with.
How scary is that?
Yeah,
Hey, we don't really know what we're doing. Fire it up.
fired
Hold my
up,
beer.
but it helped control it, right? So
Sure.
then instead of just letting it seep, it burned, and I guess that's how they considered it being capped.
Okay.
I guess so. Yeah, if it wasn't, if you look at I have on the back of that like census records, and you can see the dramatic increase in population
Right.
in the 1890. I mean, that was our high point, right? 1890s to probably like 1910. Those 20, 30, 1920. Those 30 years were remarkable for um, Hartford City's existence and Montpelier's. Because Montpelier, I think, had more actual oil wells. I think we were more gas, it seemed like.
Okay. Yeah, and I can remember that. I can remember seeing the pumps out there um, all around that southern Wells area, Montpelier area.
Yes.
There were pumps running in fields for years.
Yeah. But they had their oil up there, and I think that translated into where I guess the gas was pushed south towards us. And we tapped into the gas, which was what they wanted for the furnaces for the glass. And that's what drew all the glass factories to Hartford.
It's interesting to see the peak of Montpelier is 1900. It was a 321% increase in population
Yeah.
in that 10-year period.
Significant.
Boy, that's a Hamilton County kind of
Yes.
population increase. For Blackford County in that same time period was 158, or I'm sorry, for Hartford City it was 158% increase in population. And then we peak in 1970, which had been the time the high school was built.
Yeah.
And anticipating a continued, you would think, hey man, we grew 11% from 50 to 60 and another 2% from 60 to 70. We're rolling.
And then it starts to decline.
And then we see the decline. It's really interesting.
And I don't think we've had a positive growth rate since, I believe, right? It's been negative every year since the 70 census, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Montpelier actually saw a increase 90 to 2000. It was 2.6%, so about 50 people. It's really interesting to look at that and think about the city we grew up in.
Yeah, and I guess not to get too forlorn, right? But it's like to be that guy back in my day.
Right.
It is sad to see.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier, Heritage Days. I look forward to that.
Oh, man.
And when it came in, I had my bike. I was up there and just hanging out with friends. And one year, remember they had basketball court set up there?
Had 3-on-3. That
3-on-3.
thing was popping, man.
Even when they didn't have a tournament, you just go up there and you play.
Yep.
You didn't play at Hoover that week. You just let's go uptown and play ball,
Hoover
right?
Park.
Hoover ball, right? Some great games down
Oh,
there.
buddy. Hey, did we find anything on Swampation? I made up a new word today. Y'all are welcome.
Always an educator. Look at you.
Just trying to be the guy.
I'm gonna start calling you Shakespeare. Inventing words, adding to the English language.
That's what I'm here for. Just trying to help everybody out. Hoover Park is a whole nother anomaly, and I find it so bizarre that it was a cemetery at one time.
Yes.
And So I'm gonna ask, did they get them all?
It's a good question. I think it's a fair question. I remember when I learned that. I worked on the Parks Department with Mark Donathan and Ryan Mitchell, and we would mow Hoover Park, and our boss was Jim Tarr. And we also, on our mow route, we had to go out on 22.
Yep.
That cemetery out there.
Yep.
And one day we were like, this ain't a park. And that's when Jim told us, like, well, back in the 20s,
Mm-hmm.
that was a cemetery, and they wanted to park there instead, so they just unburied everybody and put them out here.
Yeah.
And we're like, really? I mean, it was just that easy, but different times, right? They didn't care,
Yeah.
and they buried every.
Very similar story in Madison, John Paul Park. So it was a cemetery. Hey, this would be a great place for a park. But it says not all the bodies were moved. All the headstones were.
So there has to be.
Has to be. You think about the way they were buried.
Yeah,
They're put into wooden boxes.
yeah.
It wasn't like today that they're interred in these mammoths of a casket and placed into the ground with tons of, documentation that follow.
Yeah, record keeping wasn't up to
Right.
snuff necessarily. Like the power station there on behind the Catholic Church on Water Street,
Yeah.
that was a cemetery.
That's where it was.
It's my understanding that's where it was, and then they moved it to IO. It became
Okay.
IOOF.
I thought it was where the seed company is. Right beside where
Well, I,
because it
maybe.
does say I think the way it's worded, it's at the northeast corner of that intersection.
So where the seed company is.
Yeah.
Maybe you're right. I took it different because this is things I read and I'm trying to visualize. Like, have you read some of the books from the Historical Society, like Grave
couple.
Matters?
I haven't read Grave Matters. I just saw that the other day.
Amazing book.
Yeah.
Need to get it.
Okay.
It is phenomenal. But you read these cases, and like there was a murder at a pond out by the factory, which is where like 3M and
Yep.
paper
Have
company.
you ever been back in that woods?
Yeah.
Remember going back there? Did you go back there when you was a kid?
The
Ride your bike?
pits, the pits,
Oh yeah.
ramps and stuff.
Yeah. What do you think those were for?
Makes you wonder.
I'm not going to go into it right now. I'm not sponsored by 3M or anything.
No, but there was the factory back there, and there was a pond, and there was a murder there, and I'm trying to think, well, where would that pond be? Would that be on this side of Cross Avenue, or where 3M is now, or where? I just always get into these little side things. And
My dad wouldn't have been able to tell you because he drove my mom's 56 Chevy into it.
into that pond.
Yeah.
So is it back further towards?
I don't know. I wonder, but I was told multiple times, and it had to be because my mom must have loved that car. It was a green, mint green and green two-tone 56 Chevy, and I've seen pictures of it. I've got pictures of it somewhere, and my dad drove that into the pond and totaled it.
Totaled it.
So I know what pond you're referencing. I don't know where it was at either, though. But evidently, it must have been close enough to one of the factories, and I'm assuming the old paper mill.
It was the old paper mill.
Yeah.
Do you remember when it burned down? Do you remember that?
No, I do not.
See, I remember I was very little, but we lived in a house commercial in Spring.
Okay.
And I remember when it blew, there was an explosion. There was a fire, and it must have caught an explosion that shook the house.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And I couldn't have been 3, 4
Wow.
years old. But I remember when it burned.
I didn't know you lived there.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
For a while, anyway. Then I grew up, ended up on the west side, Kickapoo Street.
West Siders.
West side.
Get out. Well, I was a West Sider too. I was Southwest Sider though.
South,
I was at Chestnut
we didn't
Street.
deal with the Southwest side.
No, man. We were there in the junkyard. We were junkyard dogs.
Yeah.
You got to watch yourself up in there. We were hardcore. We were playing around with antifreeze.
Running through mosquito repellent
Oh,
killer.
man. Oh, buddy.
Remember that days?
Couldn't wait for the fogger.
Yeah.
That fogger come through the alley, and there they were. Man, see all those bikes following it. I go, I'll be back, Mom. No, you're not. She did not let me follow the fogger. Thank
No.
God. I've seen some of those folks that followed the fogger. They have like 3 eyes and stuff now. I don't know if.
Well, it makes you wonder, right? Because we are a cancer cluster.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
That's one of the things I remember as a kid. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
there was the fogger. I mean, that probably wasn't EPA friendly.
Yeah, but I'm sure that wasn't just our town.
No, it was everywhere.
Everybody had the
But
fogger.
that's just something.
Yeah. It's
What makes
interesting.
us different than other towns? And like the junkyard. So, I grew up like 3 blocks from the junkyard. Was there seepage of stuff into the soil that I've heard about? That
Yeah, I mean, they went through what, maybe 5 years of court cases to
Yes.
get that all cleaned up. And I was just talking to my brother about this the other day. the Lou Goldberg of old, who would have been who started that, I believe. It's at least that's the oldest name I've heard associated with the junkyard, and then his son Alan, who took it over, and now with I think Lou and
Scott,
uh, is it Scott?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, they've done a wonderful job.
Absolutely wonderful job.
They've cleaned that up. The property looks great. They've
Really does.
they've met every challenge that's came at them, and they've done it right.
But
And,
it was
and I
it
applaud
was a
them for that.
scrapyard since I think the 20s. So
Okay, well,
it'd been there for a long time.
that would have made sense. There was an old lumber mill on part of their property when I was a kid. There was this old warehouse looking.
Yeah, Mercer's.
Well, not there, not where they're at now,
Oh.
across the road. This was on same side of the road on the corner. So you know where the old laundromat was.
Yes.
Okay. So the old laundromat, and then right across the street from it, there was an old like mill where they were cutting the wood in there.
Okay.
And there were still saws and stuff in there when I had to be 10 because I remember going in there and everybody talk about the blood on the saw blades. Oh man, somebody got his arm cut off in here, and
Mm-hmm.
those are crazy stories you talk about. But what I remember most is Dwight Horsley getting in a fight with somebody there, and the whole time he said pow 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 every time he'd punch. I remember it like it was yesterday. Right out there in front of it, pow, 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 pow. I was like I was watching Batman in real life.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
See, wasn't our childhood great?
Oh God, man. Oh, speaking of that area, me and Jamie Wittig would sit out there while our moms were doing laundry. We'd take fishing poles with us in one of their old purses, throw them out on the road,
Yeah.
and they'd be attached to our pole, right? And so we'd hide behind the bushes. Somebody pull up to pick up the purse,
Yeah.
and we'd put it over in the parking lot. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
somebody put it on the back of their car, backed out, and it fell off. And so it wasn't out on the road. Sometimes we'd take money to the road, like green Monopoly money out there. But people pull up, get out. As soon as they reach for that purse, we'd reel that sucker in. Oh my God, the reactions we got back then. If we'd have had social media, we would have been superstars.
You must have had the better laundromat. We went to the one there by the jail, the old jail.
Oh yeah, we had. But you guys had ice cream.
Yes.
Blue Moon, brother. Man, that
That
Blue
was-
Moon up there was legit.
It was legit. And it had the stools.
Yep.
And it was a legit ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
Laundromat next door, right?
Yeah.
Attached to the building.
Yeah. Well, there's trade-offs. You know, we were on the junkyard side of town.
You call me bougie?
You were more bougie. You had an ice cream parlor. But anyway, so yeah, I think they've done a wonderful job cleaning up that junkyard area.
Absolutely.
And I was someone that openly was like, move it. You got to move it. It needs moved. I was openly critical of what was going on, but I think they've done a nice job of cleaning that area up, getting it put back together, and I applaud them for it because it couldn't have been cheap.
Couldn't have been cheap, no.
I'm not sure if it would have been easier to move it out industrial park area or something for them, and then to do something else with that property. But they've done it, and they've done it right. And my childhood home is now a pond. Speaking of ponds, so I grew up on Chestnut Street, right across the street from the junkyard, and they bought that property from my dad and bulldozed it, and now it's one of their retention ponds
Okay.
that they have over there. But boy, a lot of memories going in there and picking black raspberries.
Yeah.
Oh, my mom could make a black raspberry pie, man. But so yeah, I would say. But so when my dad bought that in the '60s, he talked about it wasn't anything like what it became, even by the '80s. It was a small operation, just a little scrapyard next to the train station.
Yeah.
There were train station buildings all along there. Some of those foundations still exist on the north side of the tracks. I can remember mowing for the Parks Department, and we mowed that area, and you still had to avoid some foundations to with your mower. But I can remember buildings being there when I was a kid, and even down on the very far end, so at the corner of Chestnut and Richmond, there was a building down there at one time, like a train station type building, that would have been probably a checkpoint of somehow.
Yeah.
boy, how trains changed the landscape of Indiana.
Oh, that's in there too, and how significant they were, and the impact they had, and how hard communities fought to get it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so we had the east and west, we had the north and the south, so
yeah.
we were in a good spot.
And being near Muncie, Muncie has train tracks that run every which direction. Used to anyway. They don't have near as many as they used to, but having that vicinity to them and being in between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis in the way we are, very helpful as well.
Which brought on the interurban.
Yeah.
You've heard all the stories
Oh,
about the
yeah.
interurban, and it was used quite a bit. That was thanks to the railroad, right? They laid the
Yeah.
track, and our location between Muncie, which was a pretty significant manufacturing city,
Yeah.
and Fort Wayne being Fort Wayne.
Have you ever heard how long it would have taken on the interurban to get from Hartford City to Muncie?
To Muncie,
Yeah.
somebody told me one time it was about a half hour.
Really?
I mean, it was because it was nonstop. You just
Yeah.
zip right along.
Hmm.
They didn't go too fast. I mean, it wasn't. I don't think 55 mile an hour, but
Right. I always thought that'd be interesting. Mass transit. We've gone backwards in some ways.
in some sense, yeah.
Just the ease and availability and of cars has caused us to go backward when it comes to mass transportation. But from what I understand, they're building trains up and down the West Coast now. So I've got a friend of mine that's out there working on a train that
Mhm.
is supposedly going from basically L.A. all the way north to Sacramento.
Yeah, well,
It'd be interesting.
it
to
makes
see.
some sense, but it all comes down to, I guess, capitalism, right?
Right.
Is it viable? Is it a good business model?
We'll find out. It's a foreign company that's doing it. It's a European company. I don't know if they're out of Germany or Austria. I can't remember where he said it was from.
They definitely look at things different over in Europe too.
Sure.
So to them, that's makes sense.
Yeah.
But I guess it'll be tested with the dollar, right?
I would guess if you were in that LA traffic,
Yeah.
you would wonder, what the hell? Does nobody see this problem?
Well, yeah, because you're talking in L.A. It's maybe and this is the other we don't understand it. We talk about, well, how far is Muncie away from you? 30 minutes, 20,
Right.
25 minutes. To them, they have to go even further. It could be 3 miles, and it'll take them 45 minutes.
LA's not laid out like
No.
eastern cities. Eastern cities, everything's packed in and goes straight up in the air, and LA's not. It's laid out in a long pattern. It was one road. The idea was everything would just go off this one basically artery, and your neighborhoods would be there. So you go into the central artery, you go down to work, you've arrived, and you go on. Well, with the crazy amount of growth that happened,
Yeah.
it didn't quite work that way. Whereas we complain about, we we have nothing to complain about traffic around here.
Oh, I mean, you could be in Montpelier in 10 minutes.
Right, we got it made. I mean,
And it's what, 11 miles, 9 miles
yeah,
away?
something like that. Yeah.
It would take you an hour and a half, 2 hours
Oh, it's insane.
in L.A.
Insane. Just get out and drive into Indianapolis at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden, yeah.
You're not
Not a
moving
problem.
anywhere. But I was. Have you ever driven to New York?
No, I've not driven to New York.
So we went to New York for vacation, and it was. I have to admit, surprisingly easier than what I was expecting.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it takes a while, but they got it flowing pretty good, and they got the freeway that kind of goes around, so it wasn't as horrible as experience as I was expecting.
Chicago-ish?
I think it was better than Chicago, to be
Really?
honest.
Okay. Chicago's awful.
Yeah.
I had to go take a couple cars from there a couple times, and driving into there with a full-size truck and a car dolly to go
good
get a
Lord.
car out of impound. You have to go downtown Chicago to get the car, to get it released, and then leave there, go back out to Stony Island, which is on the south side, to go where the impound lot was then. It's not there anymore. They have developed that area. It was a nightmare. I had to park at a Staples like 6 blocks away from the building I was going to. Go in, ask for permission to park there so they wouldn't tow my truck while I was gone.
Yeah.
Because God knows how long it's going to take. But I would go in there and ask, hey, sorry, I'm from out of town, but I've got a truck and a trailer. And I got to go up here. And you're okay. Just park in the back. You're fine. Yeah, I would go up there and wait forever. They'd call my number. I'd talk to the lady. She would tell me I didn't have something right and that I would have to come back tomorrow.
Yeah. That would be a problem.
That's how it worked. I didn't have the proper signature. I didn't have a stamp or an embossment, I think, on my notary public. And this was a stamp, not an embossment.
So that was to get a car.
To get a car.
Were you a skip tracer or a bounty hunter?
Not a bounty hunter.
What's the difference?
Skip tracer is someone who can just find information about anyone, find someone. So if you're looking for someone who's just kind of went off the map, a skip tracer is going to find them.
Okay.
Bounty hunter is somebody that's after somebody for criminal issues. Skip tracer is typically somebody that's going after them for collection purposes.
Okay.
So I hesitate to call myself a skip tracer because that's not what I did.
Okay.
That wasn't what my specialty was. My specialty was once that skip tracer gave me information to go out there and verify it. So if Travis, he was a friend of mine, if Travis gave me information, said, hey, I found so-and-so, here's where it says they're living, I would go out and physically verify it. And if the car was there, I'd take it. If the car wasn't there, I'd find out where that car was.
Oh.
It was interesting.
So you did it back in the pioneer days too. So
Yeah.
it'd be a lot easier today, right?
Oh
Well,
my
not
God, it would be so much easier today.
with open source information.
Oh my God. It's not even the same game, man.
No.
Like, yeah. Social media, for one, is a game changer. Nobody can keep their mouth shut. You know? So if you give me part of somebody's name or someone they're associated with and why they're associated, I'll find out who they are. I can come up with a picture of them very quickly.
Yeah.
Within an hour,
Yeah.
I can come up with that information. And most people probably could too. I've practiced at it, so it's like almost in my blood. So I think that's why my kids are very hesitant to tell me anything about the boys they're dating.
Yeah. That's reasonable.
Because as soon as I find out one tidbit of information, all I need is an initial for the most part and where they met them. And it's game on.
Yeah.
So I know Addison listens to my podcast, and Jocelyn does most of the time too. And so, yeah, I think they're very guarded with what they share with me.
Can't blame them.
I can't help it. And number one, I'm a dad, and
Your
two,
dad, you're bloodhound by nature.
I am a bloodhound by nature. I mean,
I get it. I'm that way too.
I was born and bred by two nibshits, and that's a term a lot of people don't know.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that an Indiana thing or a Midwestern thing?
I think it's a central Indiana thing because I was down southern Indiana and they were like, what's a nibshit? I'm like, really?
Southern Indiana.
Really? You don't? No, I never heard that before. I'm like, are you a nib nose? No, what is that? I'm like, come on, man. You're playing with me. No, I've never heard that term. What's it mean?
Well, when I was at IU in '93 is when I went. I learned that toboggan. The difference between what I thought a toboggan was, right?
Okay.
Between a hat and a sled. Right?
Yeah. So did you think it was the hat or the sled?
Sled.
I did too. Yeah. I would say I was probably in my 20s, first time somebody called the hat version a toboggan.
Well, I had friends from bigger cities, and they thought I was a hillbilly. I'm like, I'm not a hillbilly. There's no hills in Indiana, or a crick or a creek.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'd be like, I bet Beckley calls it a crick. I'm like, yeah, Lick Creek. And they
Yeah,
go,
what else? What is it called? Is there something
it's a
else?
creek, I guess. Lick Creek.
Who would say that? It's not even spelled that way.
Well,
Not when I write it anyway.
No. Cattywampus.
Yeah, cattywampus, absolutely.
That's another one.
Who doesn't say that? You know, one thing though that I've refrained from is washing my clothes.
Yeah.
I don't wash my clothes or wrench off my hands, you know, or change my oral, you know, or any of those in combination. But my dad, well, I don't know that my dad washed, he did wrench every once in a while. Um, I don't think he said wash or oral, but my grandpa did, and he was from Dunkirk. My grandpa Fox, and he would wash his hands and change his oral.
Wash, yeah, wash
Yeah.
them up.
And then my brother and his wife, they say it. So, but I don't think Bill listens to my podcast, so I can say whatever I want about Bill. But we were in DC a couple years ago, and the guy that was giving us a tour of the National Cathedral was talking about the windows,
Windows.
and I'm like, oh, I can't let that go. I'm trying, but I'm there with a bunch of eighth graders, Jack. I can't just let that go. You know, so he keeps saying windows. And one of my friends at the time, I'm like, hey, man, um, I've got to say something to him. I got to ask him if he washes the windows. So I did. There weren't any kids around, but the other fellow was. Ron was around, and I just walked out. I'm like, hey, man, I said, boy, there's a lot of windows here. Who washes them? I don't know. I said, do you think the rain wrenches them off? I just kept going, and he's looking at me. Ron's looking at me like, "Oh my god!"
But the other guy wasn't getting it right.
He had no clue,
No clue.
no clue, and I didn't laugh at him. And you know, I mean, it was clearly for our comedic relief later on.
Well, yeah. Well, it's
So-
like toilet. Have you ever heard
Toilet.
a turlet?
Toilet, yeah.
Turlet or an idea? I got me an
man,
idea
I
about
think
that
my
one.
dad had ideas every once in a while.
They
Yeah,
that's like an East Coast thing. I think where if
I
it
would
ends
think
in
so.
a it ends like a when it's like there's no R there.
It must be the Pennsylvania coming through with
Like
all the R's.
Pennsylvania?
Yeah, you know.
Oh.
I mean, it's got to be. It's got to be something. It's coming from a cultural thing that is carried on. My sister-in-law talks about getting a pallet prepared for when her grandkids stay at their house. Have you ever prepared a pallet for someone to sleep on?
No.
I wonder if that's so. She's from the South Side, and I wonder if that's something that's carried through. So a pallet is just laying a blanket and a pillow on the floor. That's preparing a pallet.
You don't know what the origins of that are?
I don't, and I think I've looked it up before, and it just it just says, yeah, pallet is this, but it's got to have some kind of European flair to it.
Like a French military term.
Yeah, yeah, that
Pallet.
would make sense. And she is, you know, deep in the lineage of the South Side, and I'm sure it's going to come through, you know, with her family. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the Leffingwells are. Um, that would be probably within the reach of Belgian, French,
Yeah.
or German, one or the other. You know, it's got to be something like that. I'm not a nameologist. Look that up. See if that's a real thing too. We have now determined that
Nameologist.
nameologist.
I think they call it etymologist, don't they? Etymology.
Entomology. That's words, and then there's another one that's for insects. Entomology might be insects, and then there's another one's very close to it that's for words.
Etymology,
Etymology.
maybe.
Yeah, it's one is one is the other.
Nameology. It's easy.
Nameology. Did you look it up?
He's looking it up now.
Yes. I'm giving you a few new words here on the Schick Show experience.
Yeah, you don't get that anywhere else.
No, I try. I try and give everybody a little bit of culture. You know, you
Yeah.
got to rise above your raisin. That's one of my favorite Dr. Philisms. Brother, man, we got a lot covered here. We got a lot more to cover. So what I'm thinking about is a way to do some sort of once every 6 weeks, some sort of history podcast on here.
Yeah.
Whether it's Blackford County, Hartford City, Indiana, United States, whatever. There's a few of us around. There's another guy, Steve Hurd.
Oh yeah, I
I
know.
don't know if you know Steve.
I don't
or
want
not.
to brag, but I told you I've been on the radio before twice, but I've also been on Steve Hurd's podcast. He had a podcast. I was on his pre-COVID, I guess.
Well, you've heard me talk about this. The whole reason for this is Steve Hurd.
I've heard that, yeah.
You know, and, Steve Hurd is the epicenter of the Schick Show podcast. When I started putting this together, he's the first person I went to.
Well, you have to because, again, not to brag, but I was not only on his podcast, but also there was 2 or 3 games. I was a broadcaster with him for the Luke Brown era.
And those are well watched episodes of.
So yeah,
sports.
dozens and dozens of people have heard me talk.
At least 6 people have heard you today.
Yeah. No, but yeah, Steve Hurd was he was the first guy, and I saw all the equipment and what went into it, and then I talked to him a lot of it about local history. Is what we talked about. And I listened to your episode with him.
Yeah.
On this one, and that's a whole fascinating.
Oh man, isn't that
story.
crazy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I worked with Steve for years
at the police department.
Yeah, and I never knew that.
Yeah,
I didn't know his story like that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
I mean that was one of the big things that I wanted to come out in this. It's just interesting stuff, and I've said it repeatedly that ordinary people have extraordinary stories.
Yeah,
and he and I have actually talked about him coming on here and interviewing me.
You should do that. That would be interesting.
Switching seats.
Because we talked a while back about doing like a podcast, but not as scheduled. It's just an informal.
Yeah.
About Medal of Honor recipients.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Because it's funny you say that because to me it was like there are stories about just ordinary people who go in the military, find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And did amazing things.
You know, my wheels are turning right now.
Yeah. Cause I've read some stories because we were going to do that. Just time, and again, he had different job obligations than me, and
right.
But there's a lot of that. That may be a good whole vein for you to explore because a lot of them who won these medals and lived,
right,
we're just me and you, right?
Right.
But we're in a situation that we can't even begin to fathom. But they rose to the occasion, and based on my police training, that they fell back on their training.
Yeah.
And did what they were trained to do, and didn't, and it helped save lives.
I wonder sometimes how reluctant they would be to share that. Most of them would be, I would assume.
I agree.
Just the ones I've encountered where people have been in peril in that way. Not really excited to share that, and part of me totally gets it. There are things you do it because you're supposed to. That's who does that.
Yeah.
Are the people who are supposed to. They're there for a reason, and I'm not getting into the whole everything happens for a reason piece, but there are people in place at times, and when you think about the military piece of it, they are bringing in quantities of men and women to do that job, hoping that one of them will be in the right place at the right time to do that job. And in that quantity, they're playing the odds, and they're going, out of these 100, there might be 2, there might be 1. Heck, there might be none in this group of 100, but we're betting there's going to be 1 or 2 that's going to step up and do the job when they have to. And it's going to save all those others who are then, one of them is going to stand in and fill a void,
Well, that goes back to the Greeks, right? Heraclitus, right?
Yep.
He had the famous poem, you send me 100 men, 90 of them shouldn't even be here.
Right.
9 of them will be okay, but that one.
I need that one.
Give me that one.
Yep.
And he'll change everything. And that goes back 2,000 years, 3,000 years.
Man, I bet even longer.
Probably.
I mean, they're just incredible people out there that have had some experiences. I'm sure there were things that happened with you on the police department that you're like, that's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah.
Just don't care to share,
Yeah. There's a lot of sadness out there. And everybody has a story, and people will say, well, Hartford's a small town, but it has its issues that every town has.
Sure.
It's just maybe not on the scale.
Right.
But there are.
Do you think the percentages are pretty much the same, though? I always wondered that.
I
So
think the ratio is the same,
yeah,
because we are fortunate with violent crimes aren't as high as say Muncie or Indianapolis. But
right,
if you look on the scale, it's probably close to being the same. And even if it's a little less, we still have to deal with it at some point.
sure,
And there's a lot of tragedy out there, and everybody has a story. And um, I'd like to think my time as a police officer made me appreciate people more.
mm-hmm,
That they're going through something that they won't you don't know, and we get called to people at their lowest point a lot of times,
right,
and how they respond to that, you can't take it personal, or you try not to.
right,
But even in Blackford County, that's been a lot of things out there, and it is sad and tragic. But you try to help them out as best you can, and hope the system gives them a little bit of peace and
yeah.
things like that.
Way off topic, kind of on topic where we're at now, but I'm not the true crime podcast, but there is one um, out there that I would love to explore, and it's there was a man who lived in an apartment next to where the Stardust was, I believe is where he lived,
Okay.
and I think he worked at Marsh.
Yeah.
You recall this?
Oh yeah. I've yeah.
Has that been solved?
No. So here's a story. So I came on as a patrolman, and me and Matt Felver were working one night patrol. Now, when the murder happened, I was a senior in high school, and
Right.
you guys had moved on. So I remember the story. Alan Laymon
Is
the
that
guy.
his name?
That's his
Okay,
name.
that sounds really familiar.
Alan Laymon was a manager at Marsh, and was killed in October of '92.
Okay.
Stabbed several times in his kitchen. Right. Well, me and Matt kind of stumbled upon the case file, and of course, it had gone cold by that time. Several years by the time me and Matt saw it, and we were interested in it because we were bloodhounds by nature too,
Sure.
and we thought, okay, I wish something could be done with this, but we helped preserve a lot of the evidence, right? Because it was by that time it was old, it's getting old. Well, then I got to detective, and Matt Felver was the chief. And like on his first day, we were like, "Hey, we're in a position now. Let's reopen that," and we did. And brought in Jeff Sones because he was there at the time.
Okay.
So we brought him in. We interviewed all the old detectives who'd retired: Rich Anderson, Phil Laux. What do you just to preserve it? Well, then a lot of it was on video tape. Right? Remember cassettes?
Yeah.
Well, we thought we need to digitize it, so we started preserving that and going through their boxes. You can't imagine boxes of stuff and the leads they were looking at and exhausted. And but we ran with it for a while and interviewed some other people. And I guess if we're going to get the true crime podcast, I think I know who did it.
Interesting.
Matt has another take on it, which is part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
But it is a fascinating story, and that'd be one we've talked about. What's his name? He's retired state trooper, and he's friends with like Pat McAfee, the former punter.
Okay.
He's been on I think Bob and Tom before,
Okay.
but he has a podcast, and he did one on the Burger Chef murders in Indianapolis. Do you remember that, like in the '80s?
Dude, yeah, and I've probably heard about it more than I remember.
Probably.
Yeah.
And if you get read about that, that's
Okay.
a fascinating story, and that's a cold case with the state police. And again, they say they don't like to say it was unsolved. They think they know who did it, but then you get into a problem with who was the prosecutor at the time and does he like the evidence. And by this time, they think the suspects are like in their 70s.
Oh wow.
But anyway, so I talked to him. Actually, I reached out to him. I said, "Would you be interested in doing Alan Laymon murder in Hartford City?" But there's things with that. I had to talk with the Hartford City police, and we don't want to divulge things unnecessarily. But we're at a point now where I don't know what going to not
Yeah.
divulge, right?
Right. I mean, either. Yeah, I don't know how all the ins and outs, but you either want to chase it or you either want to let it die out.
We chased it, and
You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
at this point.
we chased it, and I'd have to talk with the local police first before to see what they would. But
Yeah.
I talked to the guy, me and Jeff Sims, and I just think what he was selling, I wasn't buying.
Yeah.
And it came down to what vehicle he was driving at the time, and there's witnesses that um, heard things, but they've since passed away because it's been 30,
Yeah.
31 years. But yeah,
I don't know why that one stuck with me, but it has.
well, it sticks with me, and because
You're much closer than I. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
we read the file, and anything I've learned about cold cases is almost all the time the person who did it was in the notes somewhere.
Hmm.
But you're talking books of notes and
Right.
interviews and years of the involvement with the roommate. Um, Everything about him was like, come on, that ain't right. But
Hmm.
he has an alibi, right? And
Right.
but did he source it out? I mean, why source it out? It's just it's a fascinating case. It really is.
Would that be something you'd be interested in coming back and talking about?
I would,
Could you?
yeah, very much so.
Okay.
Because I think we are at a point where we probably should just show all our cards, right?
Right.
And this is what we got. We had one chip and a prayer, they call it, right? We had a piece of DNA evidence because there was a lot of blood.
Sure.
But DNA in '92 was,
Oh yeah, brand new. I mean,
well, yeah, it would be 3 or 4 years before OJ made DNA
right.
a national term, right?
Right.
But they collected it and they had evidence, and we had a piece of floor tile and blood splatter everywhere, and we didn't think it was his. But we sent it to a lab. It had to go all the way to Arizona. And I've heard all these datelines of 48 hours and like, oh, and then we finally solved it with DNA. Keith Morrison is saying that it finally came through and they had well, they told us that it was too degraded and they could only do the mitochondrial, which would be not as precise.
Mm-hmm.
But I told, or my opinion was, get me in the ballpark.
Right.
Good Lord. Don't tell me it's necessarily Scott Schick, but if it's a Schick family member, that gives me something to work with.
Right. Can they do that ethically?
They could have.
Okay.
They could have. And see, there's a whole other branch now involving like ancestry.com.
Right.
It's a whole other branch of forensics now where they have solved murders. Now, they didn't have this when we were doing that,
Right.
but that DNA sample, they said, here's the problem. It is very small. It will only get us mitochondrial, maybe. And if we use it, it's gone.
Right.
Well,
So what'd they do?
we
Did they use
we
it?
tried it
Yeah.
because we didn't have anything else.
Right.
And it came back, couldn't do anything, too small.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
all these interesting things I've seen on TV, it's like, oh, we're going to get it. No. So it'll come down to other things, I guess.
God, I hate making light of things, but when stuff comes in my head, I gotta say it.
Say it.
Try that in a small town.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing. It would probably blow your mind the names I was seeing in the notebooks, right? They talked
Yeah.
to everybody
Wow.
about this guy. And he was from Marion. He wasn't even from here.
That's what I thought.
But you add to the intrigue, he was running for county council at the time.
Interesting.
And he died, like 3 weeks before election day.
Yeah.
So then right off the bat, like, oh my God. Well, no, it's not. This isn't.
It's not election related.
This isn't House of Cards, right?
Yeah.
County council isn't that important in Blackford County. They didn't murder him for that,
I'm not gonna get my stipend. This guy's going down.
right? But no, that absolutely we could talk about that. I want to clear it with the chief of police first,
Sure.
and see what he's comfortable with. But it is a very
Well, I got room for multiple people in here, so I'm mic'd up for 4, and
so. I tell you what, let me reach out to him. We actually sat down, Cody and Matt and I, about 3 or 4 years ago, to maybe reboot it again.
Yeah.
We went over all our notes again, what we could do, but there's only so many people left,
Right.
and it's a matter of we haven't got the confession yet, and as far as the roommate, that avenue was explored quite a bit, but yeah, I think
Right. I mean, how could you not?
I have my opinions,
Yeah.
but it would be probably a pretty interesting podcast.
Yeah. Well, something to think about. That's for sure. So we got some stuff we can definitely, it's our spin-off podcast of this Blackford County history podcast.
I would like that, and one of the reasons I did want to talk too. I am still trying to push this youth sports organization.
Yeah.
I think you are on the Parks Department,
Yeah.
but I'm hoping we get some meetings up going again. But I would encourage parents and people to talk to their local leaders and ask them about it. They should know what we're talking about. The youth sports organization,
Okay.
about kind of combining all the sports under one entity to help facilitate fundraising and just grant money and things like
Sure.
that, funding. The last meeting we had, it went pretty well. There are still some concerns, but you know how people are with change,
Right.
understandably so.
I definitely know how people are with change.
Yeah, so if we can convince them, but I'm hoping that like you're on the parks board and we get it up and running again. But I would ask parents of kids to consider the benefits of it and to encourage it, because that's what's going to have to come. It's going to have to be a public push,
Yeah.
and for the leaders who tell me they're interested. I know
Yeah.
we've talked about it. If you discuss the ins and outs of it, it certainly makes sense.
Makes a ton of sense. And as somebody who has fleshed that out at some point with Blackford softball and pulling that away from Little League and creating their own to rebuild a program that was dying and on its deathbed, it certainly makes sense. And the intent of that was always to come back and combine all these sports organizations so you have continuity, so you have
Yes.
leadership that can speak one language across the board. We're not large enough to have 5 different organizations or whatever it is at this point, especially when it comes to fundraising, because you start stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah. Grandparents can only buy so many steak knives, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's only so many donations one can give.
But a concerted effort to combine all those resources, and like when we played Little League, there was 7, 8 teams.
Yeah.
We had the last 2 years I've coached, we had 3
Oh
teams.
my gosh. Yeah, and
Barely 3 teams. I
and
mean,
you had a Babe Ruth, and you had Montpelier.
yep, no Babe Ruth anymore.
Yeah.
Little League is 3 teams, barely. I mean, you're talking 9 to a team. So if somebody's sick, you're 2 outfielders, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna try to play it that way. If it wasn't for combining with Upland, that gave us Upland and Eastbrook. They had like 8 teams.
Yeah.
So we hopped in with them, and they kind of helped us.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did want to
Yeah. There's
throw
opportunity.
that out there, and hopefully we push it and we can do something.
I like it. We can bring some people in here and just have a conversation, push it out to everybody.
Yeah.
That would be good too. Cool. Good stuff, man. Thanks for coming by.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're out of here.